Just share with us who you are, what family you've got at home. Let's get to know you.
Yeah. So I'm Francis Mathew, and thank you all for coming to this event this evening. I am from India, if you haven't already guessed that, or from the video. My parents come from a state in South India called Kerala, and that was a state where Christianity first came to India. The legend says that it was Apostle Thomas who brought the gospel in AD 52. And so my parents come from that state, but they migrated to Mumbai, so I grew up in and around Mumbai. I'm married. My wife, Medonio, she is from the state up in the northeastern part of India called Nagaland. And again, a rich history. Nagaland is known as the Baptist capital of the world. About 75% to 80% of the population attend a Baptist church in that particular state. She then lived in Delhi for a while, and then we got married. We met when we were working with Youth with a Mission in India, and then we moved. Currently, we are now based in Bangalore, the city that you saw in the video. And my wife and I, we have a 2-year-old son who's very active and keeps us busy all the time. So that's a bit about our family. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so you were brought up in a Christian home. Sort of your faith journey, was that, when did you come to faith? When did you really know Jesus Christ as your Saviour?
Yeah, I grew up in a Christian home, a Pentecostal home. So we were always regular at church, the Sunday school, the youth group. So grew up being instructed the Word of God and matters of Christian faith. But I think for me, it's like a light bulb going on. That sort of moment happened when I was attending a Bible study at our church. And it's very strange that you would hear this kind of testimony from a guy who grew up in a Pentecostal church. Often you find the more ecstatic ones and those sort of things. But for me, it was very plain simple. Our pastor that Sunday, during that Bible study, was doing a thematic Bible study on sin, salvation, and the centrality of the cross of Jesus. And although I'd heard all about it growing up in a Christian home, but that evening something clicked for me. I realized that I'm a sinner and in need of the grace of God and the salvation that He offers. And so I made a public confession after that Bible study. And my life has never been the same ever since then. I got baptized a couple of years later. So that doesn't mean that the journey was always smooth. I've had my ups and downs, questions of faith as well. But I've always found that God's love and His grace has always sustained me even before I made that public confession. And He gave me the grace to know Him, but He continues to give me the grace to walk this journey with Him. And so, yeah, that's been my journey.
Wonderful, wonderful. And was sort of your calling in work, is that always been into Christian ministry, or was there a career before then?
I don't know if you're aware of a Pentecostal setting in India. You would often have these itinerant prophets who would come to your churches. And so I remember as a kid, a few of these itinerant pastors and prophets come and lay hands on me, and they sensed that there was a calling of God over my life for mission. Although I was very excited about it, my dad said, "Oh no, maybe that's not for you." So I pursued engineering. I finished my graduation, and it was at a youth camp where I strongly sensed the call of God over my life for ministry and for missions. It was a call I tried to run away from, but then I knew that I couldn't. And so I prayed about it for a few days, and I shared it with my family, and that's where my journey into sort of a full-time ministry, if you would like to call, looked like. And I worked with the church for a few months, but the pastor soon realized that I needed some sort of a training.
That's very
So back then, all I knew about Christian ministry was you could either be a pastor or an itinerant prophet, and I didn't want it to be both. So then my pastor suggested, okay, there's this Christian organization called Youth with a Mission. Why don't you try that out? So I joined BIVAM for a 6-month short stint, but that 6-month turned to 9 years. And over the course of that 9 years, I strongly sensed this passion to study theology. And that's when at the end of our 9 years, soon after my wife and I we got married, we went to the seminary in Bangalore to study.
Okay.
And yeah, that's been my life.
Very good. So is that your first connection with Avila then when you...
Yes, yeah. So when I joined the college as a student is when I met Dr. Havila, and it was through Dr. Havila that I got to know Langham and Langham's ministries, in that she sort of exemplified the vision that Dr. John Stott had to invest in potential leaders on campus, but even in the church. And yeah, so that's when I met Dr. Havila, and she has been a mentor to me ever since then. Yeah.
So it's a bit like that video, isn't it? Like when she got the Langham Scholarship herself, she didn't realise what that meant.
Yeah.
And the same for you now, that that first conversation, that first meeting with Dr. Avila back then, if only you knew what that journey was in front of you at the time.
Yeah. I had no clue that I would end up doing a PhD back then.
That you'd spend a June evening in the middle of Bristol.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. So Langham Scholar, what, a couple of years now? Or studying your PhD, should I say, for the last couple of years?
Yeah.
So just to tell us about your studies, what that is.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm doing a PhD in the Old Testament. I'm glad to have Dr. Helen Painter, who's my supervisor here, who's also a tutor at the Bristol Baptist College. And she heads the Center for the Study of Babylon Violence as well. And I'm doing a PhD, and in my PhD, I'm attempting to understand the theological significance of the silence of God in 3 of the rape stories in the Old Testament.
Wow.
So I'm looking at the rape of Dinah in Genesis 34, the rape of the Levite's concubine in Judges 19, and the rape of Tamar in 2 Samuel 13. And interestingly, scholars have looked at these stories and often wondered, why is God silent in these stories? He speaks before it and in some cases after it, but he's not speaking into it. And so how do we understand it? And the ball sort of got rolling for me when I was doing my MTH studies at SciEx, and I happened to do a small thesis around these texts. And I realized there is a significant gap in biblical scholarship when it comes to understanding the silence of God in these stories. And you would have some of the traditional interpreters who would look at these stories and say, oh, God's judging them for their sins, for the sins of the patriarchs or whatever. And on the other hand, you would also have some of the modern feminist interpreters who would look at these texts and say that God's probably indifferent. He doesn't care about what's happening to the plight of the women in the stories. And this is where I'm hoping to come in and make a case that there's neither of these extreme positions, but there is a nature and character of God that's more consistent with who He is in these stories that I'm hoping to bring out through my thesis. And and the extremes that I pointed out are also the questions that linger in the minds of most of the victims of rape and sexual abuse and their families as well. And you would find, I find that in the churches in India as well, and whether you are non-Christian as to in India as well, because we are a religious country, the questions of where God is in these crises often looms large. And you would often find people judging the person who's gone through that ordeal for what, for either their sins or for whatever that is, God's judgment is an extreme position that's often heavy on the survivors of rape. But also the other position where people feel that, oh, God doesn't really care. And I hope that although my research is primarily a text-based research, it will have some significance and would shed light to the ongoing situation, not just in India, but hopefully a universal appeal as well.
Mm. Wow. So, I mean, are you looking at that mainly from an Indian context, or you just said it, hopefully a global context?
Yeah. So, at present, I'm not really. I'm an Indian, I can't escape that, but my question is largely a textual inquiry. So I often do find points of resonance with the characters in the story and what they are going through, and with our Indian context and our sentiments when it comes to understanding rape and questions around it. So there are some points of contact, but it is largely a textual inquiry. But I hope, once I've done the research, I hope my findings will come alongside the pastoral care that's offered to victims of or survivors of rape and sexual abuse and their families in India. So that's my prayer as well, so that it would have some sort of practical groundings as well.
Well, that's the key question, isn't it? I think when anybody sort of hears about Langham and you ask about Langham and you share the 3 programs. Preaching, people get that. We need preachers. Books, we need books. We need to read it, and we need more PhD doctorates. Or do we? Why? But you just answered the question, because there is a real practical point to it at the end of it, and I think that's the key thing for us to hear and understand, that does get to the ground level. It's not just writing a thesis and putting it on the shelf, especially when it's subjects like that you're tackling, and putting it in a biblical context. So whereabouts are you in the stages of your studies? What's happening?
So I'm in my final year of my program. I've got about 6 to 9 months to finish my writing. With regards to my progress, I'm currently trying to finish my 2nd chapter, and then I've got one more final chapter. And hopefully that's the agenda that's there.
Wow. So how long where are you studying? So what's your the colleges that you're based at?
Okay, so I'm pursuing my program through Bristol Baptist College, and which Bristol Baptist College has a partnership with Trinity College as well, and the degree is validated by the University of Aberdeen. But I'm based in India because the college offers this program. In a sense, it's a distance-based PhD program. So I could be in India, and then I get to visit the UK once in a year for the PhD conference. But I also take this time to stay on for a couple of more weeks to sort of catch up on my writing and gathering resources.
I don't know if you. I think I'm not going to. Don't quote me unless you know it, Francis. But about 50% now of Langham PhD students are able to study at home rather than having to be based at a college. It's about
I'm not really sure of the statistics, but I know of a lot of Langham scholars who are based in their home country but are able to do a very good PhD program either in the UK or in the Europe.
Because again, we were talking about this when we had dinner earlier. You with a very young family, that would have been difficult to put it easily. If Aberdeen was the place that you've got to be and shift the family, that would have been a tough call.
At that stage of our life, it would have been a difficult thing to move because my wife was struggling with some health crisis as well. So we knew that moving outside of India wouldn't have been a wise decision for us. So I'm very happy that this program worked out very well for us.
So how long have you been in the UK? How long have you got left?
I'm here for about 10 days this time, and then I head back to India.
And how long have you been here so far?
Been here for about close to 4 weeks now, this time. But I was here last year as well, and I stayed on for about 6 weeks here.
Excellent. So just tell us about next week. So you're in Oxford next week.
Yeah, I'm in Oxford next week for a Langham consultation, and I will be presenting a small paper there. That's it about. But I hope to also meet other fellow Langham scholars from Asia, Africa, South America.
That must be. And you said it's about 30 coming?
Close to 25 to 30 Langham scholars.
Out of think it's 99 we've got studying at the moment. So that's a good percentage of them in one place. That must be it'd be interesting to be a fly on the wall. There's so many from different regions, obviously different subjects that they're looking at. But that must be a blessing as well, just to be able to hear their context and their study as well.
Yeah, I'm quite keen about events like this because it offers you an opportunity to hear what other people are doing, to address either contextual or textual issues from within their context. And it's always encouraging to meet people and hear their stories as well. And I'm keen to seeing how, to build possible friendships and networking as well, so that there are opportunities to collaborate in the future on projects that could address matters of faith in our Asian context as well. So.
Yeah, no, I think I can't imagine. I mean, I struggled to get my A levels, never mind anything else. But for you to be with people doing as good as the same thing as you, there can't be many people in the world that can understand what you're going through and the sort of highs and lows of those studies. They're a unique group of people, I imagine, that can say, "I know how you feel."
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. So just tell us about that. We'll come back onto that in a bit, but just if you would share, what over the last sort of 3-4 years, some of the highs, some of the lows, things that we could be praying for later on.
I think the highs for me has been just the joy to carve out this time and study. I've often enjoyed my research, the text that I'm dealing with, although it's quite intense, but the joy of discovering something new and unique as a student has been much rewarding. I remember when I started off this program and I had a Zoom conversation with my supervisor, and what she reminded me back then, I stayed on with me, is that, Francis, treat your PhD as if it's a worship to God. And often during the low times as well, when I'm struggling with some issues at church, that sort of takes off a lot of my time off my PhD as well, I come back to God in those low times as well. At times when I'm really struggling and wrestling with the text, and I struggle to put the first 100 words typed down onto the computer as well. I know through the good times and the low times during this PhD journey as well, I come to God and say, "This is a worship to you," and I do want to offer my research as a worship to God, and that something that would bless the church.
Yeah, definitely. Just on that, then, I think just to bring it back to Langham to a degree. When I joined Langham sort of 6 years ago, and I was doing my research as I joined the organisation, one thing that really struck me with the scholar programme was the scholar care coordinators and the care that goes into the scholars. Because I'm going to paraphrase the quote, but the John Stott quote is, "We've completely wasted our time if we've got a well-educated person, but in the meantime lost their faith. What a waste of time that was." So hence the care coordinators that we have. So just tell me about how that works, who you link into, and what sort of blessing that's been.
Yeah. So when I started off the Langham, my PhD program, I think in one of the questions that I had to fill in during the application was, what are some of the challenges that you foresee while doing your PhD? And I thought to myself, I've done my master's in divinity and I've finished my MPh. This should be an easy work for me, But that question made me sort of pause and think, okay, have I put in some measures in place to see that there are no upsets, and if that do happen, do I have some safeguards that I've put into? So I'm thankful, first of all, to my supervisor, who is not only a brilliant scholar but an excellent pastoral caregiver. So I'm blessed by her. But I've also, my wife and I, we also have a mentor, sort of a counselor back home in India, whom we sort of go back to. But I'm thankful to Langham particularly, not just for the financial support, that helps pay my tuition fees, but also for the care that's given by the Langham Care Coordinator. So right now for me, I have Dr. Federico, who is a Langham scholar and who is a graduate of Trinity College here, who is my Langham Care Coordinator. And so I have Dr. Rico from Philippines who once in 2 months we do a video call. At least once in a month he sends me a text asking how am I doing, how's my family doing. And so that's been a rich blessing to know that Langham is not just interested in me getting a PhD, but is really concerned about my life, my heart, and where my family is at this moment. So I'm grateful that Langham has got such a well-rounded investment, in a holistic investment, if I may say, into the scholar's life. And so,
yeah, I mean, Rico of all people, I think, like you said, a Langham scholar himself. So, like I was saying earlier about next week in Oxford, you'd be amongst people that say, yes, I know how you feel. Rico can definitely say that, especially when he's been studying here as well, that he knows that. That's wonderful. And Rico's, I mean, he's always travelling, isn't he? But he's in the UK later in the year. We've got events with him in Belfast, end of October time that he's in the country. He was here in the background, so I met him a few times. No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I'll ask. It's a question I asked earlier, so it's the obvious question. Because so you're supported by Langham, but also scholar leaders. So it's the obvious question: if that wasn't there, if that support wasn't there, you'd be not here.
Yeah. I think if I hadn't gotten the scholarship from Langham and scholar leaders, I think there's no way in the world I would have had the resources to do a PhD in a world-class institute like this.
Wonderful.
So I'm really grateful for this investment.
No, Francis, no, thank you. So this time next year, if you can imagine that far forward, done and dusted, all ticked, what's next? What's your hope? What's your vision going forward?
Like I said earlier, I hope and I pray that in some way, after I've done my PhD, that I can take the findings of my research and actually see in some way if it could bless the church. And some of the NGOs, especially in India, that work towards the rehabilitation of the victims of rape and sexual abuse in India. So that's one of the agendas that I have in mind. But in the long run, I hope to be a full-fledged faculty at SciAx, the Bible Seminary in Bangalore, where currently I'm a faculty in training with the Old Testament department. So I would love to teach and write, not just for the academia, but also for the church. And that's something that I'm quite passionate about. I definitely, my wife and I, we love to disciple young people, and so that's something that we want to be doing. We just carrying on the vision of Langham, and as passed on by Dr. Havila as well and Dr. Paul Windsor, to intentionally invest in thought leaders of our nation, so that they are able to go forth and impact the church, the mission organizations, and the society at large in India. I also hope, and I do want to be part of the Center for the Study of Bible and Violence, because that's a center that I've been richly blessed by the friends that I've cultivated through the center. For those of us who don't know the center, please do have a chat with Reverend Dr. Helen Painter and Carolyn as well, who's a research student with the center, just as me. The Center for the Study of Bible and Violence has a twofold approach where we sort of come alongside the church in how we wrestle with the text of violence that we find in the scriptures, and secondly, also in ways how we sort of can come alongside the church in equipping to safeguard the church against, in instances where the scripture is often recognized and that further cause hurt to the ones who are oppressed in our society as well. And so I hope to work alongside the Center for the Study of Bible and Violence. And if opportunity arises, to continue with Langham in whatever way I can be of assistance, whether it's through Langham preaching or Langham literature in whatever ways, to. So when I first, I was a member at the church, and when I first shared with our pastor, he said, don't you have any other topic to about? Why rape? And you're a man, why are you doing this? But when I shared my heart behind it, as to how it can come alongside, because I've had friends who've been abused, both in the church and outside as well, and I've just hearing from them, I know how tough and painful it can be when you go through such a crisis in life and go through trauma. It sort of distorts your understanding of not just reality, but added to how the church offers little care to people and their families. You sort of sometimes are at the far end of even losing your faith in God. And so when I shared the heart behind it, he was a bit convinced. But then when my previous pastor had to move out of the church, and so the board approached my wife and I if we could become the pastors. And so when I shared that I would be doing a PhD and this is the topic, the board was very happy about it. In fact, they were thrilled to have a pastor who is keen on studying and wanting to invest. And so I haven't had much of the opportunity to share some of the insights with them, except for a few people in the church. So I would say, they've been fairly excited about it, but I haven't had the opportunity to win everybody over. Yeah. Thank you for the question. This is something that sort of got me into thinking about this topic as well. In fact, one of the arguments that I make in the construction of my methodology is for any meaningful communication, both silence and speech are part of it. And so often people have done enough research on the speeches of God in the Bible. But if we are to think of the communication of God as meaningful, we ought to pay attention to his silences as well. And so I'm using speech act theory as my conceptual framework, which allows me to frame the question as, just like how in speech act theory you would say, what is somebody doing in saying something? I'm framing the question as, what is God doing in being silent? And so in order to understand that, one way is to pay attention to how God as the author of these stories sort of appropriates what the narrator is doing in the telling of the story. But I also argue, taking from communication theory, that if we pay attention to the speeches of God around his silence, then we can make a compelling argument as to how we understand what God is doing in his silence in those stories. So I have to be honest at this point, I think I happen to do all of these. It just happened that all of these responsibilities came together at the same time. Right before I started my PhD, I knew I had to get some financial backing for my living expenses. So that's when I took on the pastoral role. And I was assured by the board that it would be a part-time responsibility, and so my PhD would be the full-time thing that I would be doing. And then when I started my PhD, my wife and I, we struggled in our marriage with infertility issues for 6 long years. And so we never thought that we would have a child. But the very month that I started my PhD, we got to know that my wife conceived. And so we were having a child. And so then the responsibility of being a parent as well. And so, and I would say by the grace of God and the support I've received from my supervisor, my church, Langham as well, I think I've managed to cope up with it so far. Though I would not say I've done justice to each of these responsibilities. I often make the statement that I've often done one thing at the expense of the other. So there are some months where I like plunge into my PhD and I get a good amount of work done. But then there would be some issue at the church and then it would take quite a bit of my time. And then I have to again do a lot of catching up. So yeah, that's been my journey. And I think as a father and as a husband, I think that's something that I can never escape. That's full time. Yeah, there are many more people in India who are doing the kind of work that Dr. Havil has done. I think Langham has made quite a significant impact in India. If I'm not mistaken, is it true that we have over 50?
It's about that.
Yeah, 50 Langham scholars throughout the landscape of India doing the kind of work similar to what Dr. Havila has been doing. And so I'm probably in that tradition of Christian workers in India. But, so we've got some very prominent thinkers, practitioners in India who are doing this work, but it is fairly, I would say, a small percentage given the population of India. And the population of Christians in India is fairly large, and there is much more that needs to be done in our nation. So, yeah, I would say I stand on the shoulders of many more, so many giants who've gone ahead of me.